So let's begin our first sit. I will invite 3 sounds of the bell and invite you to enjoy this calming time. Before we begin our walking meditation, I wanted to read something from the book that I'll be using tonight, which is called No Death, No Fear, because it helps to, I don't know, set the stage a little bit, I think, for a walking meditation. And the section is titled Appreciating Earth. For many years, I have told this story. Suppose two astronauts go to the moon. When they arrive, they have an accident and find out that they only have enough oxygen for 2 days. There is no hope of someone coming from Earth in time to rescue them. They have only 2 days left to live. If you ask them at that moment, "What is your deepest wish?" they would answer, "To be back home walking on the beautiful planet Earth." That would be enough for them. They would not want anything else. They would not want to be the head of a large corporation, a big celebrity, or president of the United States. They would not want anything except to be back on Earth, to be walking on Earth, enjoying every step, listening to the sounds of nature, and holding the hand of their beloved while contemplating the moon. We should live every day like people who have just been rescued from the moon. We are on Earth now, and we need to enjoy walking on this precious, beautiful planet. The Zen master Lin Chi said, "The miracle is not to walk on water, but to walk on the earth." So, for a time, we're going to be conscious of walking on the earth, taking slow, deliberate steps. It's sometimes useful, excuse me, it's sometimes useful to say to yourself a few words. I am home, I am here, thank you, yes. Um, those are ways, I believe, of staying attached to the process. We'll now begin our second sit. Well, I'm pleased that we were only interrupted once by a barking dog. My office opens up through I'm in a loft and there's a window to the downstairs. So, am I unmuted? Okay. Um, I feel a little bit like Zoom, like I did when I had a cell phone for the first time, and I thought I had to bring it around to my mouth and shout into it. I just feel awkward. So, anyway, it's hard for me to close myself off in a room. It's impossible. I have thought about living in my car for a week so that I could have a little quiet and privacy, but I haven't had to resort to that yet. I'm going to be talking about this book, as I mentioned earlier. And when Heather asked about teaching, I did volunteer to teach. And then I thought, well, what am I going to teach? So I remember that I had this book, and it seemed like it was an important enough book that it survived the move that I made here 5 years ago when I gave away truckloads of books. And it was time to revisit this and to share some things from this book. I think that I had read it before or read some of it, but knowing my attention span, I probably read some and then I went and watched HGTV or something. So I don't remember much about what was in it. One of the things I liked best was an opening story that Thich Nhat Hanh writes. And I thought this was dear enough that it was worth sharing his words verbatim. The day my mother died, I wrote in my journal, a serious misfortune of my life has arrived. I suffered for more than 1 year after the passing away of my mother. But one night in the highlands of Vietnam, I was sleeping in a hut in my hermitage. I dreamed of my mother. I saw myself sitting with her, and we were having a wonderful talk. She looked young and beautiful, her hair flowing down. It was so pleasant to sit there and talk to her as if she had never died. When I woke up about 2 a.m, and I felt very strongly that I had never lost my mother, the impression that my mother was still there was very clear. I understood then that the idea of having lost my mother was just an idea. It was obvious in that moment that my mother was always alive in me. I opened the door and went outside. The entire hillside was bathed in moonlight. It was a hill covered in tea plants, and my hut was set behind the temple halfway up. Walking slowly in the moonlight through the rows of tea plants, I noticed my mother was still with me. She was the moonlight, caressing me as she had so often done, very tenderly, very sweet. Each time my feet touched the earth, I knew my mother was there with me. I knew this body was not mine alone, but a living continuation of my mother and my father and my grandparents and great grandparents, of all of my ancestors. These feet that I saw as my feet were actually our feet. Together, my mother and I were leaving footprints in the damp soil. Thich Nhat Hanh goes on to say that if you're grieving, do a walking meditation, which is what we just did. Pay attention to the leaves, the flowers, the birds, the dewdrops. If you look deeply, you will see your beloved manifesting in many forms. You will again embrace the joy of life. Pay attention to the word manifesting because it's one that's going to come up again and again. He goes on in the book to talk about how traditionally there have been two ways of looking at life after death. One is that we see that we have an eternal soul. The other is to see that there is nothingness. Thich Nhat Hanh says that there is, in fact, a third way of looking at life after death. He says, since before time, you have been free. Birth and death are only doors through which you pass, sacred thresholds on our journey. Birth and death are a game of hide and seek, he says. You have never been born, and you never die. Our greatest pain, he says, is caused by our notions of coming and going. I'm going to repeat a little of that because I think it's so important and visual, and that makes it understandable. Birth and death are only doors through which we pass, sacred thresholds on our journey. The Buddha says that birth and death are just ideas, and by holding on to them, we suffer. We need to understand that we cannot be destroyed, that nothing really goes away, and everything manifests, there's that word again, manifests in different forms. Our greatest pain, he says, is caused by this notion of coming and going, leaving. We think that the person we love came from somewhere and has now gone away somewhere. But the true nature is the nature of no coming and no going. When conditions are manifest, there's the word again, then when conditions are sufficient, we manifest. And when they are no longer sufficient, then there is no manifestation. It doesn't mean that we don't exist. You have always been there, he says. Always will be there, though maybe not in the same form. There is no death, no birth, but only continuing. You probably know that famous quote from Shakespeare's Hamlet, which is, to be or not to be. The Buddha answers, to be or not to be is not the question, because to be and not to be are just ideas. They're not reality. I'm going to dazzle you with some high-tech graphics. Here we go. What is this? Cloud, right? All right. But is it just a cloud? No. It is rain and wind and moisture and atoms and molecules. So it's a cloud. and it's rain, and it's different things. Sometimes it's just blue sky, right? So have the clouds really gone away? No. Just because the sky's blue, the cloud can come back, right? It's manifesting. Let me read what he has to say about clouds. If your dear one has just died, you may have a difficult time overcoming your loss. It is only because of our misunderstanding that we think the person we love no longer exists after they pass away. That is because we are attached to one of the forms, one of the manifestations of that person. When the form is gone, we suffer and feel sad. The person we love is, in fact, still there. He is around us, within us, smiling at us. In our delusion, we cannot recognize him. We say he no longer is, and we ask over and over, where are you? Why did you leave me all alone? But the cloud is not lost. Our beloved is not lost. The cloud is manifesting in a different form. Our beloved is manifesting in a different form. If we can understand this, we will suffer much less. I'm going to inject a personal story here because as I've been reading this, I've started to understand what happened in a way that I'd never understood it before. When I went away to college, I did not go away to college as most people do. I was a non-traditional student, and I was very non-traditional. I was almost 30 years old, and I had spent my first 2 years of college at a community college, and I was working full-time and going to school full-time. Then, much to my amazement, I got accepted to somewhat prestigious university, which was all well and good, except it was 6 hours away from where I lived. And that meant that my husband had to stay behind, and I went off to finish 2 years of college 6 hours away. So we didn't see each other very much. I had left family behind. I had nothing in common with my classmates. In fact, I realized once that I was getting married the year they were in kindergarten. So there was a wide gap between our experiences, and I was lonely, and I was stressed. Academically, it was very difficult. So just a little background to what was going to happen. I was not in a good place. So I'm asleep one night, and the phone rings. I get out of bed because the phone's in another room. And I pick up the phone, and it's my father. And my father says, hi, Princess, which is what he always called me. Hi, Princess, what are you doing? And I started to answer. And then I remembered that my father had died a year earlier. He had died very suddenly at age 60. He had simply gone to bed and not awoken. I said, when I realized that I was talking to my dead father on the phone, I said, where are you? Where are you? And the next thing I know, I'm awake and I'm holding the phone, and it felt as though this electric field, a force field of some kind, was just dissolving from my body, from the head to my toes. I've never had anything like that happen before or since. And as I'm thinking and reading about this manifesting and, different forms appear at different times, I'm thinking that's probably the closest to describing this experience that I can come up with. Certainly was memorable. So as I'm reading on through the book and remembering this, I felt even more connected to what I was reading. Thich says, when we lose someone we love, we should remember that the person has not become nothing. Something cannot become nothing, and nothing cannot become something. You may remember from science, you learn that matter cannot be destroyed because it manifests into something else. Thich says that our beloved can manifest in other forms, like a cloud, a child, or a breeze, and we can see our beloved in everything. He says, smiling, we can say, I know that I have not lost you. You are always with me. So he gives us some concrete examples, which I think are very useful. Another graphic, high tech. Waves, right? He talks about waves. And we have gentle waves, and then we have sort of exciting waves, and then we have maybe some menacing waves. But these are not just waves, they are water. And you know that water is everywhere, in us, around us, in the sky, the clouds, the waves. So let me read you what he says to illustrate. When you look at the surface of the ocean, you can see waves coming up and going down. You can describe these waves in terms of high or low, big or small, more vigorous or less vigorous, more beautiful or less beautiful. The wave, he's anthropomorphizing the wave here. The wave might suffer from fear, from complexes. A wave might say, I am not as big as the other waves. I am oppressed. I am not as beautiful as the other waves. I have been born and I have to die. The wave may suffer from these things, from these ideas, but if the wave bends down and touches her true nature, she will realize that she is water. Water is free from the birth and the death of a wave. Water is free from high and low, more beautiful or less beautiful. High or low, only in terms of waves. As far as water is concerned, all these concepts are completely invalid. So he goes on to say, practice like a wave. Take the time to look deeply into yourself and recognize your true nature. It's the nature of no birth and no death. This method of practice will help you be free from fear and to live peacefully without regret. So that's the wave example. Now we're back to our friend, the cloud, because he talks about the cloud a lot. example number 2. Now you've already had the quiz, so you know this is a cloud, but it's not really a cloud. It's more. The cloud does not come from nothing. There has only been a change in form. It is not the birth of something out of nothing. Sooner or later, the cloud will change into rain or snow or ice. If you look deeply into the rain, you can see the cloud. The cloud is not lost. It is transformed into rain. And the rain is transformed into grass, and the grass into cows. And then you might think you have a cloud, but what you really have is ice cream. Yes. The cloud's transformed into cows, and then into milk, and then into the ice cream you eat. Today, if you eat an ice cream, give yourself time to look at the ice cream and say, "Hello, cloud, I recognize you." By doing that, you have insight and understanding into the real nature of the ice cream and the cloud. You can see the ocean, the river, the heat, the sun, the grass, and the cow, and the ice cream. That is big. And last example, he says, during the winter, you don't see sunflowers or dragonflies. It seems they don't exist in the winter. But we know this is wrong. When conditions are right in spring, these will manifest and appear again. So last, I'm going to tell you about something I heard a long time ago on a radio program, a public radio program that I used to listen to a lot, called This American Life. Maybe some of you know that radio show. I was a faithful listener, and then it didn't seem like it was quite as good, and I haven't listened for a while. But there was one particular memorable, unforgettable story that had stayed with me all this time, and it seemed like it was related to this talk I was going to give. It came from 2016, and the title of the story was Really Long Distance. Here's the background. In March of 2011 in Japan, there was a devastating tsunami. There were 30-foot waves that washed away houses. 19,000 people died, 6 times more than were lost on 9/11, and 2,500 people remain unaccounted for. As you can imagine, families struggled how to make sense of this, how to continue on. And because Japan is largely a Buddhist country, most of the Japanese are Buddhist and have a strong connection to ancestors. About a year before this tsunami occurred, a man, a Japanese man, had lost some family members, and he felt the need to manifest them in some way. He did that by going out and buying a telephone booth. It's one of those kinds of telephone booths that look like it would be on a street in Great Britain, sort of ornate. And in it, he installed, well, didn't install, he put a telephone. And he would go and talk to people he had lost in the telephone booth. This was a year before the tsunami. And the telephone booth looks out over the Pacific. It's in his garden, so you get a little vision of what that's like. Well, after the tsunami, people learned about this man's telephone booth, and they began to come and talk to the dead in the telephone booth. They would come and sometimes dial, it was rotary phone, they would dial the number of the home in which they had lived, the home that probably most likely didn't even exist anymore. And much of the time it was a kind of daily update. I mean, children, grandchildren would come and they would talk about their schoolwork. Um, a I believe a British TV crew, got permission to install a microphone in the phone booth, and there is a documentary which I have not seen that that showcases. No, that's the wrong word. Displays some of these stories, some of these phone conversations, and gives some more details about this telephone booth, which is called, by the way, the wind telephone. And you can look it up online and see more for yourself. So I thought that was quite an unforgettable story. Just the idea, our our attempts as humans to manifest those who have who are gone and who can't be reached by more traditional means. They're seemingly unavailable to us. The dead are still with us and we're connected. I also thought it was interesting that more men than women would go to the telephone booth, maybe because we can speculate that it's not so easy for men to express their feelings. So I'm going to end with a poem that I think that Heather can bring up on her screen. This is a poem that I have shared with Sangha before, but it's one of my favorites. And there we go. And it fits so perfectly with what I've talked about tonight. It's called Absences, and it is a tribute to by a poet named Mark Vins to a friend who has died named Bill Holm. And the epigraph to the poem is something that Bill Holm himself said. Even when you are not in a room, you are still in it, your voice everywhere. The message that's recorded on the phone is unmistakably bad news. And then another call tells us it's one we love. A sudden death while traveling, somehow appropriate for one who always seized life too completely to stand still. A door slams shut. A wall has dropped away. And once again, I'm driven back to empty pages, insufficient words, to rooms he always filled on entering, rooms lined with books, piano music, and good friends who raised their glasses one last time. And now, as all the lights are blinking off in every prairie town we ever loved, when all the toasts are made and songs are sung, when leaving is the only certainty, a single voice keeps echoing along each dark, untraveled hallway of the heart. I'm going to now offer us a time of sharing. I think you probably know that you can unmute yourself by tapping that little microphone that has the red line through it on your screen and contributing anything that you think you would like to contribute. We do that in a special way that I think is respectful of others. When we are ready to speak, we unmute our microphone and we bow in, announcing our name. In my case, it would be Debra bowing in. We say what we would like to say. There is no other talk among our Sangha members, no crosstalk, no attempts to interrupt or to inject any kind of thoughts while that person is speaking. And then after the person has finished speaking, there is another ceremonial bow out and the next person is welcome to speak. So this is Debra bowing out.